아, 대표성으로야 나는 치료되는 수야. 예.
To everyone who has come back, I extend my greetings of good afternoon.
로종 츠게 메기 로종 츠게 마든가 다 쉬는 신기 다나 쇼베 쉬는 신기 그런 츠게 알스 쇼로게 쇼로게 되게 엔터 게 냠랭기 냉가름 게 된거 알스.
As I shared this morning, our text is the 8 verses for training the mind. And in the same way that it has 8 verses, it also teaches 8 points of practice, or 8 branches of practice.
난 당부대 지리심제 담제 이신기 노부터고 라바사리므레 가르니 주사는 지심제 담제랴 안지 제신 팡바 남 안지기 개치보스야지 다디야 이신기 노부터 드리지기 수수기다 자침스야지 드리지량 아주 로장고를 소래.
And as we heard this morning, the first branch of practice that is taught by the first verse is to develop an attitude that sees all sentient beings in general as being similar to a wish-fulfilling jewel, training in developing that attitude, training in developing an attitude that cherishes and deeply values sentient beings, sees them as important and similar in quality to a wish-fulfilling jewel. We train our minds until this outlook develops in us.
니버디 엔 스제디 가사 스제 가라도 지존 스제
인지라
버베게데
라서
지 슈간도
강도 수단 로베세
강도 수단 로베세 다니 꾸네 메다시
라레
샹라 삼바타와이
저도 제바르즈마쇼
저도 제바르즈마쇼사데 다디 포인트 디 가르 사람 안지기 네 강도 대비남자 안지 저 수단 로베이남자 초 탐제네 런이르베 멤버 멤버 때네 닝타와네 닝고 리베티니스는 저도 다가다 셴래야 그바 차라 지 로정야 되버래.
The second verse of the text says, "Wherever I am, whoever I'm with, may I regard myself as lower than all others, and from the depths of my heart, may I hold them as supreme and cherish them." The practice that this verse teaches is to always be respectful toward others. So, whatever place we are at, whatever company we find ourselves in, no matter who may be around us in any direction, we train in regarding ourselves as lower than the others with whom we are sharing company. And we try to develop this attitude from the depths of our heart and the marrow of our bones, regarding ourselves as lower than any other being with whom we may be associating. We train our minds in respecting others.
The verses the church about being humble. Member Ziada. Shela Chodo Kubataji, Libra. Zudi Azung Nageki Kashwataji Nage, she wearing Dusan, Tatelia, Nimboteachi.
The main quality this verse is highlighting is being humble. So we regard ourselves as lower and others as higher or superior or supreme because we have this quality of pride that exists in our stream of being, and we must apply some type of antidote to remedy that pride. And to remedy this pride, we engage in this practice that is taught by the second verse.
Tome Samarataji be Mi Yuan Denjian Mi Chuburu, today to Yungre Young Mi Yuan Den Meba. Non educated Dana Shingi Tangbo, the Delina as a Java Yungre. The Degiji, Tome Tashingi, Gu Mambuchi, then Javachi Yungu in Dusana, the Yomba Kadolia. Angazuki the Semia, ready Senado, as which her did Chawadi, Kitchen Chadi orders. Labardo Ngazuki, Nage, Nagegi, Telia, and just of Chawadi. Nagegi, Sabasoma Retaji, Telia, just of Chawadi, Kitchen Chadi orders.
The reason we need to pay careful attention to our pride is that when endeavoring to benefit others, we will come into relationships and connections with all kinds of different sentient beings. Sometimes we'll meet with people who are learned. Sometimes we will meet with people who are wealthy. Sometimes we meet with people who aren't educated or who are poor. We make connections and relationships with all kinds of sentient beings. And so since that is the case, we need to be ready in our minds. We need to make our minds so that they are ready to be free of pride in any of these circumstances. So preparing our minds and exercising vigilance toward pride is very important.
Humbleness and Adado, Nagemeva, Yanaji, Nyumchu, Mesasia, Sandy Kubdilia. Kadambe Lama Komatizuki, Bed of the Karashana Sana, Bedi, Jasunashi, Jasu the Beshaimbre.
In terms of the quality of humbleness or being free from pride, taking a lower seat, the Kadampa masters of the past have illustrated this quality using the example of the ocean.
gyasu data gyashimshu chadiyare, powerful. 아주 점링기 사 콜란디 야자 망부지 야주 차대요래 추 차대요래 야주 차대요래 야첨부예와 띵사부예와 띵 차대요래 이내야 이 야주디 가두이냐 거라 사자 마사 질이야 내려요래 계시 사자 야주디 사자 통부질이야 대여임나 아니지 추디디 상물로 야주 나올래야 밥도가 많아. 야주 밥도가 많아.
The reason why the ocean is used to illustrate the quality of humbleness is because even though the ocean occupies a great deal of the area of the planet, such a vast amount of the Earth's surface is covered by water and covered by oceans. The ocean is very vast and very deep, but nevertheless, it still holds a low place. It holds the lowest place on the planet. And if it weren't that way, if the ocean were to attempt to be in the highest place, then it would be impossible for the waters to descend and land in the ocean.
Humbleness the church and Zhengyi Susu Ji Kashwada Lobjong Chengen Sanadado Yana Tada Ji Lobjong Cheshi Besandrado. That Digi Bijil and Dushi. They doesn't get Simjian Kadesh to be in a digit Samology Susugi Digi Lobjong Chesegi Garshua Kokopchi. Simjian Sudaji to be in a digit Lobjong Chia Kokopchi in Sabrache. Tidisi Tuane Tatar Zimbi Bina. And Shine Jitangi Belaji Chutamji and Gazuna or Sheva Nansingi, Yunden Tamjedi and a Rangi Gulin Jong Tuyachi, Yungores.
But since the ocean assumes the lowest location, then it is able to receive the water from all rivers. And so if we join that example with the practice of humility, or holding the lowest seat, what we can do is view ourselves who are in the process of studying how to become humble, to take an attitude that we are training in the practice of humility, and therefore anyone with whom we meet represents an opportunity to learn how to become humble. If we train in this way again and again and develop the quality of humility through that, then we will become like the ocean. Just like the ocean receives the water from all rivers, we will be able to receive or attain all virtuous qualities.
I guess I did. Kadam Chezan the Dosho and Shevina, I guess I did, and Dirchigores Kashua. The balsam bold of stress. Did you understand? Bold of charge, you understand? Did you then cannot Kashua the G. Tigar Chudish Lubimina and the Chudi Kashua the G. Chuchato manners.
Lesson?
Or dinner in the church, and ngage de king bam ji kasure ji king be number to ji mi industane so so ji improvement somewhere you believe that not improvement is not necessary somewhere that no improvement is it's necessary that energy means that the junze dene that the again dralia ko ko yares tini dusan kap dilia mensa siasa di anji yage susu ji yarge drose langa dilia gyeshi mruchi dilia an droshi mruchi mi dusane ji wonder de chadi yebi za wonder somero da ji susu langa din droshi mruchi chadi yebi za khari bine ji lobjo chadang khari bine susu ki ji susu se kajoda understand charuch dinejigi kajoda 고급 주진 사바체 대삼다고 하다 개점 있으래.
Lassa? Then we can look at humbleness from the opposite perspective, which is to look at the faults of having pride, or allowing one's mind to be governed by pride. It's said that that state of arrogance is like a ball, is like pouring water over a ball. When you pour water on the ball, it's impossible for the ball to hold any water. In the same way, when our minds are governed by arrogance, there's no chance for us to see any space for improvement. We think that improvement is not necessary, something that we don't need to pursue. And because we think that way, we block any opportunity for the development of positive qualities off. So, having humility, holding the lower seat, is a quality that opens up a pathway for us. It opens up a pathway by which we can explore, by which we can learn more and gain more understanding. So in this way, seeing humility as a creator of opportunity is very important.
Sometimes confident, proud, the confused somewhere that when you knownness and the truth and something Baba said that I said and
sometimes we get confused about the distinction between confidence and pride.
제가 즉 다른 데 아주 시리하게 나게사디 다게 컨디션은 신기 주 소수기 your own accomplishments the field of your own accomplishments somewhere that is sosu rangi ji rangde sena do yaman ji sosu rangi ji karshoda ji 다지 김젠질 대체네 아니지 킹베 넘버로지 다 대아주 김젠 넘버만 봐 김젠지 가르에 단낭도 붙이려 대체네 아니 킹베 넘버 진유데 붙이 진짜지 붙이 진짜게 킹베기 에너지 삼바디기 소술이야 다지 야르겐다기 고급세난다도 야나지 yana compared to dragi space somewhere. Tati nuru tongo yobichi. Tetsamdo maasebeki anu nga yetiki shena keshu cha. Susu rangi tati the sense of accomplishment the yobi insa and dig mission daki ya member ten mission daki unaccomplished somewhere tachi tizulia be kashu de chen and ji my keshu cha the day young others.
The pride that we are discussing here as something we want to free ourselves from is a state of mind in which we focus on our own perceived positive qualities or our own perceived accomplishments as the reason for feeling this way, but it turns out that it's not an authentic reason. These accomplishments or positive qualities that we're focusing on when we have pride aren't what they seem to be. They're not a true basis for having that attitude. They fill up our minds with a bunch of clutter, and that prevents us from having opportunities to grow as a person. It prevents us from nourishing our positive qualities along so that they get better and better. It blocks out all of that space that would allow us to do so. But not only that, when we have this type of pride, we also engage in mentally putting down others, looking down upon others or belittling others. So whatever accomplishment or positive trait we're attributing to ourselves, we look for someone else who doesn't have that trait, and we want to regard them as inferior for that reason.
Dachi examples and the best university shubimida. Tabana Bangaran Gesa of Chashavin, Dachi Gesa, Ben Perd of Chashavin, the Perlia, Kyone, education style, Lobson the Zoo, member style. Uneducated Mimang we are, Dana Singi, Yellow Masing, Mimang we are. And the Azur Chasham Daji Chundune and the Gamabres Sachi Munziche and Deji Lobjong Cha Coco Lobjong Suchini Mandene, Mi Uzu Gebje, Lobjong Chaguaruchi, the Chare, and Lobjong Bache, and the Neji Gahad Yale. And the Zimbeshindo, Zimgi, and Zambulin Cascalea Chinje. 통계도 야채르치 그 담에 망고통 제가 다 지금 아주 뭐 보유 대대에 대해서 저소소 연대 체험도 선한다도 지 냠용 체험도 지 통계 체험도 다 퇴계 체험도 차 제가 삼성 수술디 됐 고출량 지 차가 유해서 말이지 대 증거가 이내다 참참 제가 참참 표현이지 배받는데 참참 연구하래 따지다 영화 깔락하고요 하래 근데 참참 연구하래 참참 연주산에 아주 투제 책을 꺼라 다 계속 망고시아 그 두주의 연구면도 다 도저히 short somewhere short meeting 그렇죠 그 두주산에 은 고주기 되지 sincere somewhere 배 쥐어만 뭐인 봐 다지 지 삼바사마르 지 관주에 간다지 규정부지리아 맞아 투야가 라와로 치지 가시지 딱 미지지 나로 팅지만 투투 말했음 다 내삼단데 용대어를 쳐서 다지 수수 삼로 나로 배 유리 배 가서 시야 깨져 배 약슈선한다도 개치슈의 상시고요 나래 대시주산에 겁티주산에 신행아주 심귀티베아지 그래서 에듀케이션이 싫어요 말해 아주 난시 통계의 지기 차라 신신도 망보지 통요 말이지. 이면 그수 신세 the motivations and 다도 야는 죄만만 임비 삼바 대 통요 뉴스안에 아니 신의지 수수인의지 가셔다. 고주기 죄만만 임비 tel해야지. 다 럽종 채과르지. tel해야지 고주를 봐 멤버 다 셴네. 다 고주 자천 버려도 고주 죄만만 임비 삼바 되지. 아주 좋아. 지마로 삼바르지 되지고 삼루주 과지 용도 과.
라서
제가 다디 베스멘트스 example.
라서 ini 당보 코란속 나래 도스 잡아디 더 삼노 다 중용사. 라서 잠잠나.
Maybe you just
Okay.
I can't
Okay.
hear
Okay.
properly.
Yes.
It's quite long. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
It's okay?
I think so. You can correct me if I make a mistake, please. So to give an example, we could talk about the place where I grew up, which was in a remote area of Tibet. So in the place where I was born, and indeed regarding Tibet generally, there's not really a high level of education, and especially in the more remote areas, access to education is very poor. There are many illiterate people, and so on. But at a young age, I was recognized as the Karmapa, of course, and that brought me into many opportunities to receive an education in various ways. Even though I didn't want to engage in study, I was forced to engage in study of various kinds. Then later on, I went to India, and gradually I was able to visit many different places in the world. So my insights about the world broadened, my experience of the world broadened, and because of that, there have been times, from time to time, that I would reflect back on the ordinary types of Tibetan folks that I was surrounded by during my childhood. And I would think to myself, well, they haven't gotten the chance to learn as much as I have. They haven't had the opportunities to have the experiences that I have, to see what I have and hear what I have, see the places in the world that I've seen, and so forth. So, seems like I'm in a better spot than those folks. So this type of thinking wouldn't occur to me often, but it arose from time to time. But then, I would meet with people from remote areas of Tibet and ordinary, humble Tibetans. And of course, when I meet people like this, it's usually not for a long time. There's usually only a short time for us to meet. And due to that, some of these people have been waiting for a long time to meet me. Some have such a strong degree of sincerity that they feel that they've been waiting all this time, and this might be the only time in their lifetime that they get to have an exchange with me. So they bring this really powerful attitude of preciousness into the meeting, and of course, when you feel that way, you're going to say the things that matter most to you in your heart. When I encountered these situations, I was really overwhelmed by their sincerity and inspired by their humbleness. So these people, in in many cases, the people who came to me with such sincerity didn't have any education at all. They didn't have any broad experiences of the world to share, and so forth. But what they did share was extremely sincere. And when I witnessed their uncontrived sincerity, then a genuine appreciation for them arose in my heart. I feel that I was then able to put them in a place above myself and assume the lower seat.
다들이 유산에 간다 전주스마 사디 learning 스마르 로존샤의 종타면아 로존샤야 지 가르쳐야지 degree 제 다처럼 로존 차르래 답에 체 토슈들 레사르 단 니엔 라요 마르사르지 바지면
라사
가르사는 선수배기 은 신뢰하고 알아 심지 신기 된샤사디 이제 당기 주변에서 심지 리자네 고란데 지 롭종을 차요 봐 심지 창문으로 찍 말해 찍 마도면은 안다 롭종 스타버라 게요 말어
라사
다 심지 타요 말해 야 대다 리지기 지 감다 매바이냐 타요 말해 제사 디균세는 대수 리자네 아주 롭종라한테 종다 매버지 이미 인주사네 디균세데네 전주 선배기 잡았으나라도 전주 선배기 라바 암냠len 라베 종다매지 용디요래 드리미 디균센데네 검들이야 지 더니 군이 멤버단 세두사네 다 야지 misunderstanding 차나야 보여 말로다지 멤버다스 다 nga랑 가 중금에 사르식 더니 녜베 레로 사지 용거로다 된데고 완도 마송아 아다지 수수 가르쳐다지 롭종 챙겐지 인사마치다 바조디 심젠디 수수리아 롭종 쟁겐지 인사마 드리지기 굴롱 키체 드리체네 전주세베기 냠네 체비면 전주세베 냠네 사다 거라 토범에 해봤으나 나도 드리치 냠네 차지 온디가 알았어 디 냠네 드리기 냠네디 종타요 말아 심지에 마세기 봐도 이제 다 냠내서는 롭좀 샤도 종타 매베 인두스탄에 다디 개심 차디가 알았어
For the bodhisattvas, there is no end to learning. There is no state at which the bodhisattvas arrive, at which they're told, you've done all your training, you've received all the education one could possibly receive. There is no more you could learn after this. There is no higher state to proceed after this. And the reason for that is because there is something to learn from each and every sentient being. When the bodhisattvas endeavor to benefit others, they learn something new from every sentient being they make a connection with. And sentient beings themselves are limitless. If there was only one sentient being the bodhisattvas had to help, then there wouldn't be an inexhaustible source of learning for the bodhisattvas. But since sentient beings are limitless, and therefore the constitutions, interests, and abilities of sentient beings are limitless too, then there's no end to the bodhisattva's learning. There's no end to the bodhisattva's training in altruistic conduct. And that's why we are encouraged by verse 2 to regard ourselves as lower than all others. We shouldn't misunderstand this point about regarding ourselves as lower than all others. We're not being encouraged to engage in self-degradation or self-aggression, nor are we being encouraged to jettison our self-esteem, thinking, oh, I can't do anything, I'm so bad, and so forth. If we were to adopt that type of attitude, then that is what is called the laziness of self-deprecation. In other words, not trying to help others by making the excuse that you aren't able.
Excuse.
So rather than thinking in that way, what regarding ourselves as lower than others here means is that we regard others as an opportunity to learn. And we regard the sentient beings who we meet with as educators, someone who have something to teach us. Thinking in this way, and with this motivation, the bodhisattvas learn something everywhere they go, and their training has no end. For as long as sentient beings have not been exhausted, then the trainings of the bodhisattva are not exhausted.
Actually, from the beginning, I want to give this in English, but that's why so many pages here. Oh, this is. But after I arrived in England, wow, they speak very good English. Then that's why I think better to forget about these things, you know. That somebody kare.
Chulam kundu.
Chulam kundu ranjula kare.
Dokching yun mong kia mata.
Dokching yun mong kia mata. Dashin marun chebe na zenda doni.
Lari dokbarsho.
Dokbarsho asad.
The third verse says, "In all activities, I will examine my mind stream. Since mental afflictions damage myself and others, the moment they arise, may I energetically face and reverse them."
Tadi somebody 가르쳐주잖아. rangi ji chawa khande ji chebe kabri ne samara beta ji pajidere jualam rangi jualam ji rosha niendo jualam samara beta kanda tela sobe ji de sha Rosha Nindo Janam Kandisheve Negabla Jususugi Gulia be examine your mind stream. Samarvataji, Rang Gulia, Tashishene. And Kadiji, Nyomomba, G negative emotion, Samarve. That the Digi Geva, Tomatado, but Zentabsupa Garne, be Kajure. Drunk up Zentabsupa Doneche, Gago res, this one.
So whatever activities we are engaging in, going somewhere, sitting, sleeping, or what have you, we should always examine our own mind stream. And whenever negative emotions arise, then we try to energetically or very strongly reverse them or put a stop to them the very moment that they arise.
Tadi ji nyumo le ya ji nyebu den ya senen zhang do yana ji 지 바이오 텐시 돼야지 마인드풀니스 뭐로 다 tinsa지 다 tin지 바이오 텐시 돼야지 다디 소요비므라.
Lasa? The practice that this verse is teaching, or the branch of practice that this verse teaches, is to apply the antidote to mental afflictions or disturbing emotions, or in other words, to practice heedfulness and mindfulness.
다들 이제 수수기 딜레아 가서지 베르지 수수 relaxing 스므로 되지 르르 대회 qab리나래 야메나 지 수수지 베나지 모르다 백업 스므로다 이네다 야나 페이스북으로 같이 백업이네다 카 근데 간제지 qab리 미네야 안주 수수기 귤이야 딱지 채고래 사들.
Lasa? So we're encouraged to have constant vigilance over the state of our mind, whatever it is that we may be doing, whether it be relaxing, driving a vehicle, Facebooking, or any other activity that we're engaged in.
다디 아주 트레이닝 체베카도 로전 체베카도래 인지민지 가수래다지 다지 남주시아들의 tinsa nambe chue de manguchi gi bena ji meditation sa ro chi da ka chue da ji relaxing sa ro da manguchi she ya le
Lasa?
che za an ji na ju sa ji samba lhulu cha ro ji samba de ji samba lhulu cha ro ji da ji relaxing ro cha ji ji spiritual massage so
Lasa?
de ji cha so Did something on him. In a cup the Lojon Sadi, the child man, the whole intensive care some of Jusolia, G. Simki, Detalia, intensive care which go over.
Lasa?
Says intensive exercise, which the Chadi on him.
These days, it's not uncommon to hear presentations of Buddhism that emphasize meditation as a method of relaxation. Sometimes we might derive an understanding that the whole of Buddhism is about making our mind relax. And so we take an approach to Buddhism as if it were one big spiritual massage. But here in the context of the Lojong teachings, it's not like that. It's more like an intensive therapy for our mind, or an intensive series of exercises for our hearts and minds. So it's not just about relaxation per se.
Didn't you say Labadoji as a kumshi nimba summeratachi, Suzuki, Guritachi, Yomumba, Yomumba the January kumshi, Yabatis in Guatan, kumshi Sawa Guatan to San, and uneasy than Lela Maimbaji, the pen, the sword, the so Maui Murba.
Lasa?
The Lela Guatan to Marba.
Lasa?
The
reason why it's called an intensive, we could call it an intensive process, is because on the path of awakening and on the path of mind training, what we're trying to do is change our habits. And some of our habits run very deep, and some of those deep running habits are negative habits. And it's not necessarily going to be easy for us to change them. The process of changing those bad habits and getting into new, more constructive or healthy habits might entail some hard work and some experiences of feeling sore and so forth. So it's not all just easy going.
다나시 아줄이야 플랜 70과데 개점 10 차대도서 처시 가르레스나 지금 샘디 그런 가와치네 치인섬데 그걸 데려야 수수기 컨트롤 센터 take care 오지 맞으면 가와치네 치 당샤나 안고 샘 정보 차라지 배나 수수기에 가서다지 샘디 넘규 아주기 가르셔서나 나와디 룩해버레스
맞아.
아니 샘디 부중다와지레스 부중주다지 부중주다지 인두산에 나와디 룩해버시주에서 부중주니 가디네 고고단지 찌두레스
맞아.
제상 아주기 델이야 부중주 델이야 다오게네 안 델이야 가서지 care 제고레스 다 된다고 지sun 거 알아. 제자 디균제 되네. 코랑 강도도 다서 보면 수수기 될래야 care taking care 제와데 개좀 차대요. 디균제 되네. exam 제와데 그 뒤에네 다지시네. 니주 컨제 차도 컨제 용거도 다지 제와데 개좀 차대요.
It's important for us to have a plan in place regarding how to care for our mind in any given situation. We shouldn't let our mind simply follow its regular habits as we go about our day. If we simply let our mind go wherever it wants to go, then that's how we become stubborn. There's a saying in Tibetan that says, "Appearances are skilled at deception, and the mind is like a small child that follows along." So appearances are very good at tricking us, and our mind can often be like a small child that just follows after the trick. Instead of simply letting our mind be fooled by appearances again and again, we should take care of this small child well, closely and carefully, instead of letting it do whatever it desires. This is very important, and that's why we're encouraged to always examine our mind to see what kind of a state that it is in.
진짜 까담 고문데 저기 가르쳐야지. 딜이야 가르쳐라다. 게임 더비치 수에제. 게임. 제모자브.
Lesson.
제모자르 베너지 도가나사 기지셰르바 도가바다 나고사 제모르주바.
Lesson.
따이네 거뒤네 도가바지다 나고지 키우쇼나 깔라카브로와.
Lesson.
따이네 또 도가나사르 초지는 아주 되게 아이디어로 가려 연구를 다디지 게임 더비치. 삼다지 아주 기지 녀모래야 지금부터 사다라 녀모다 수수 녀모다 게임 더비지 삼다지 가다주 수수 니마질이야 저 톱쇼를 가져 연구도 와 수수 개가 가져 도고도 와 아니야 판과 가져 연구도 와 진짜지 대지 가르쳐다 지 이용 미용도 최다 체네 진짜지 가르쳐래 아주 배주해야돼 계속 차려야 돼
Lesson.
마더베 근데 용과쇼 사지긴 드려 말해 이용 미용도 대지 되지 게임 되지
Lesson.
다디 당분에지 네
Lesson. And the great Kadampa masters of the past would use games as a skillful method for helping examine the mind and the state of the mind. So we hear stories of past Kadampa masters having a group of black stones and a group of white stones and using them to count the negative versus the positive thoughts that had occurred in their minds. So you can, in modern language, we could refer to this as kind of like a mindfulness game. And we can build on that idea. It would be difficult for us to carry around a bunch of black and white stones with us all the time as a method for keeping track of our mind, but we can build on that approach of the great Kadampa masters of the past and take an attitude of creative play with us into this endeavor of continually examining our mind and watching out for disturbing emotions. We can take this approach and then see what the win-loss ratio is for ourselves personally. How many times do we win against our negative emotions? How many times do we lose against our negative emotions? And we can simply give it our best shot and see how we do, see what the results are, and see if we can't get our mind into some more positive habits that way. This is the way in which we can apply effort to continually examining the state of our mind, but it won't happen simply by making the wish, may my mind get into better habits, or may my negative emotions be reduced. It's not going to happen just by making this wish. We need to put effort into constantly examining our mind again and again.
Wow. My goodness. Where's the fourth? Ooh. Tadine Shivadi Shuniamero.
Lasa?
Shivadi City Gare.
Rangxing and Besem Jennam.
Digdu Chabe Nentongse.
Renshin Terbang Trebajin. Nyepar Gawe Jedzin shows.
Rangxing and Besem Digdu Chabe Nentongse. Renjita the Trebashi. Nyepar Gawe Simzin shows at him.
The fourth.
Oh. Go ahead.
The fourth verse says, "Whenever I see beings of ill character weighed down by harsh misdeeds and suffering, as if I had discovered a treasury of precious jewels, may I cherish them as something difficult to find."
Tadi Digwad Dunga Chabin Nebeki Semje Sobare. Tadi de Tombe Gablia, Tatam Jelia, Jeban Zimba Labach, Dreambare.
Lasso?
Tadi zu Niji Yamlen Chade Merosam Tanto.
Lasso? The branch of practice indicated by this verse is the practice of cherishing sentient beings who are weighed down by harsh misdeeds and harsh forms of suffering. And I think that this point is particularly connected to the practice of compassion.
Tadi Rangxing and Bessimjen Sidusana, and Shigang and Bashayeva. Tinjege Simjen, Tinjitobe Gablinare. Tana Shingi Energy Kashiji Digba, she will Lagape Nundruji and Sanatando, Lagashrak be Tuja G Cheshava. Tindrege Mitinje Tobically Nare. And Tana Shingi Dungebe G Luki Nazala Sobe, Simki Dunge, Luki Nazas, Simki Dunge, Jegebe. Shushinbu Nende simply the topic of that gives some logic. Suzuki Kajuradaji Ninji Kaju Unajanek, Pejuchiaki. That did home be Kodolia, that Digolia, Suzuki, the Ninji Nuba Conveto Haki, Kogoruchi in Samacheje, the Rigida, Lojon Jonta Reza Jimta.
Lasso? Here we're encouraged to regard our encounters with sentient beings who have very negative dispositions or very difficult personalities, as well as our encounters with sentient beings who are undergoing harsh types of suffering, and sentient beings who are in the process of committing severe negative actions, making very big mistakes, or engaged in activity that is very harmful. We're encouraged to regard all of these instances as opportunities for training in compassion, as opportunities for furthering the quality of our compassion, improving the quality of our compassion, making our compassion more vast, and putting our compassion to use. And we do this as well when we see sentient beings who are experiencing harsh forms of suffering such as illness.
다디 지당게 고대버세 다 고대버서 다디 된다도 고대요 다이네 지 라렌 때도 사네 갈래 하고 지 연대 요래.
Of course, the point that is being made here is very easy to understand, but when it comes to putting it into practice, that is very difficult.
We have some questions, yeah?
Yes.
Where-
Jisha Yore.
Oh, there.
Lare.
Okay. 다들 인주산에 다디 선이 쉬는 저거면로 선이 셔베디 쉬나. 마치 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. 저기 살아.
Gandri Tanzo Sangi.
말해.
Oh.
시바디.
Lasso.
다 디젤 당아도 좋아하시 레아로 시는 약만로.
Lasso.
주주 제가 쓰도와.
Lasso. So I think at this time, it might be good for us to conclude our discussion for the moment about the 8 verses for training the mind and discuss the remaining verses during the teaching session tomorrow. And during the half an hour or so that's remaining, I think it would be good to take some of your questions that have been submitted in advance. Kandri Yamo Jungsong.
나. 그래도 야부
지우라.
산다칼. 나.
Tanda kutse digiring la. Ta ku gongma ki ta chiu la shirap tunye bo nangsong.
나래.
Tengsang chiu la kamer nangi base.
주라.
Lao.
가면은 거에.
Lao.
주라서 참 가발 당게.
Lasso.
맞아. 다그 이제 지우가 촌주거리야지. 아 촌주거리 수고만 해주사네. 고마. 양주로바디 지우를 토냐빈 결혼을 지우를 가바치하고는 돈도를 지체제. 결혼 지우를 가바치하고는 제 지우만 보시지. 내가 됐어.
Lasso.
지우 촌촌 제 아래 어그네서 진이지. 어그네서 와. 내줘.
Lasso. Parrot.
알아니 미세스게 가서다지 자스게는가.
Lasso.
미세. 지우디 지단 지우 가고도 이네. 지우디도 작전나를 루샤시드상아 그뒤 기부자는도.
Lasso.
제장 아니 가르치려다 지우디도 지기 7월에야 안 고란주 런중기 구유 나로래 버버츠버치 게는 겹치두사는 섬기고요. 제장 안다 드르지마도 미세기 치우래 미세 가버치지 다보기 다 수수 다보시라 자좀 되지 싫어하는 게지 미세스 게임도다
라서
나
닭박 야야기 왕제
당에 탑시 제인 뭐마 추주가 탑시 제인
맞아.
내 싫어 조금도
라서
조금 되는 요샤이
라서 So the question was, do you talk with the birds in this lifetime? And what do they say? Oh, I forgot to translate that part. What do they say? We can go back for part 2. The 16th Karmapa, the question continues, spoke to the birds. So His Holiness says, he started off by saying, yeah, I phone them sometimes.
No.
He said, when I was young and recognized as the Karmapa, a bunch of people would tell me about the 16th Karmapa's affection for birds, and they would say, well, you have to like birds too, because your predecessor really liked birds. So people gave me all kinds of different birds, parrots and so forth. But I was always uncomfortable with keeping birds in steel cages. It never felt quite right to me. And I never felt comfortable with that situation of keeping the birds in cages. To me, it always made more sense to have the birds...
because I'm always be encaged.
Lasso? Oh.
Maybe,
yes. So to me, it made sense to let the birds be in their natural environment and move in their natural environment as they wish. And so, in terms of keeping birds, I don't feel like I've quite been able to get into it so much.
Oh yeah, I think I tried many times when I was small in Tibet, but always failed. It's not so sort of capable to keep birds or taking care of them. I think this is very difficult for me.
Right.
But I tried.
Awesome. Okay. The next question says, Tangbo Injila Lokshaga. Tangbo Injila Lokshaga.
Okay.
Lasso.
말을 당봉에 벽에 나오로.
Re.
당봉 벽에 나오로.
Lao.
First, you need to tell the meaning. Then we should decide.
Wow. Can't be able now, the shoe song.
오네.
Lao.
Okay, can't be able to say. Someone yabuja mendoda. Linda.
Tene ngarang chug nyalan chene lo shipju drosong. Tene ngarang ke sampala jamling di tos yarge drocha yogi reis samdegi. Yene yarge chane droyo ma reis. Tene ta ngarangi notary di jamling di yarge madroya di ngarangi notary insa reis. Tene ngarangi notary kares osong jamling dindawo dukchak chakpa di ngarangi notary ngarangi notary kare che yusare.
Wow.
So the question says, I have been practicing Dharma for 40 plus years and was expecting the world to be just a little better towards the end of my life. Could you explain where I'm going wrong with the state of the present world? Thank you, Karmapa.
That is loud. That will. That zamling kyun yong ne yabu cha sa de kala khab sta de ta yin ne chi cho chi ne ka zhu de nam gyun chi samsam nga zu di che do ji be ji ra wa de ra thang de che ne kala khab zhu yong do ta yin ne ya mi zhe ring yi de tin zhen wu ne be ka shuo ji ni ji jie la sam jie tin zhe tong du zan ne o de zhen bu lin tan do ji zhe wa de yu sa la sam sa lo tin zhe chen ge du 미카시 주어버다 뉴스안에 아다 지금 저번에 가라가버로 시도 소상을 정도 간단하게 추어지네 뉴스안다 추어지는데 조조의 소수기 소수지 야고차입니다 소수 야고차입니다 따뜻한데 뒤긴 저번에 뒤토려야 된데 지 가서다지 미치 상보를 차 민행바지 용루치
나서
안다지 미상보지 망도치 단지 용되게 여인들산 나티기 방봉년이야 수수전이 야버차도야지 진짜 제입니다 다티지 good news 주지마다
나서
시험마다 가나 가버주셔
나서
아니 얘고마디 착바르던데 떠요
나서
newspaper 같은 떡이 선교인데 디나네 그 섹션 주직데 good news래
나서
다딩에디 야데다 가서디 electronic version이다
나서
현다 상황 업데이트 경우 쉬운 정도
맞아.
선교 상황 데 good news 데 업데이트다 용도
나서
삼삼레레 니레스데 마도베 안지 마무시다 용도 제가 지기 가서다 지 초신은 아주 선교도 되듯이네 디스터빙 차대도 양의 니수 토려 야지 선교나 셰브는 양의 니수 토려 안지 저번에 토려 니수 상부 망부 지용돼야지 이내 대지 아주기 하마오밤 양지 선교 그 남바제 마차부터 이제 망부 지용스러 봐
나서
나서 제가 아주 항상하기 니주지 미네야 된도 니주 상부인데 이제 뭐 있으래
니주 상보
항상야 매나양
나서
니주 상부인 봐
나서
진짜 망부 있으래
나서 Well, it's difficult to make all of the world better. From a certain perspective, we can reflect on the state of the world and begin to lose hope. But on the other hand, sometimes we see just one person practicing compassion, and that can help us to feel more encouraged. One person practicing compassion or practicing having a good heart. So sometimes sometimes our feeling about the world depends on whose behavior we're witnessing. We can witness individuals practicing compassion and feel good about the world, but then turn around and see others doing negative things and start to lose hope again. So I think at the end of the day, it all depends on what we do with ourselves, and that's the most important thing. If we can work on ourselves and make ourselves a better person, then we will definitely be helping the world, because we will be decreasing the number of confused people of ill will in the world and increasing the number of good-hearted people in the world. And I think that when you really look carefully, that we can be able to accept that as good news. When we work on ourselves as people and improve ourselves. Apart from that, it's very difficult to simply make the world a better place. So for example, I read the news quite a bit, and I read a certain version of a digital newspaper that has a section entitled Good News, and then the other sections are simply regular news feeds. And the section on Good News doesn't get updated very much with new headlines. One or two new headlines every once in a while. All of the other sections of the news are constantly getting updated with new headlines that are mostly discouraging developments. But sometimes that's just because that's what the news is reporting. Sometimes, even though there is nothing shocking happening in terms of positive developments, and therefore they don't get reported, there are still many positive developments that are happening. So it depends on what we're aware of that's happening in terms of good things happening. And sometimes it can depend on what the news is reporting as well and what's being emphasized there. So there's a lot of good things happening that we don't hear about, and I think it's important to keep that in mind too. Tene Rikyu Chokri sengen chik yorwa nga so chitsokinangdu yongi yorwas Rikyu Chokri. Di yuna di kandes donglen chekore tene dila
Rigdan Gubazar.
Rikyu Chokri dan discrimination seati.
Discrimination. Okay.
Kashila Rikyu tone yenje chepal
Pomo. Samsam Pomo 용고도.
Pomo gitone Rik lao. Di yudu tane dila kandes donglen chekore.
Re. 다리 가르쳐다 지금 한 참으로래야 지 시제차네 지 가르쳐다 지 참니사의 초진은 아주 very basic 가르쳐다 지 아주 좋아미 창매기 문시기 시제가 통하는 사람도 아직 개좀 차네요 알아서 아주 사람을 미해지고 해보체 팀 배찬다 very basic 통하는 마친체 다 디토리아다 지금 아주 지 야지 조다 망고셔르데 저 파샤한데 오늘은 very basic 토마토 유산 아사물 미베 지바 디도고 소여베 지바 드레이비 유산 디토나 삼담이나 마소리 개발 매베입니다 드레이 디 개발 매베 지미 유산 디차네 아는 안 참로지 가서 지기지리아 지 가서야지 그걸 세난다도 지기질에 재와다 지기질이야 그걸 지 가서다지 차차외바 드리차리 알았어 드리지가 토안에 시제차네 삼동안데 계속시라 차대도
라서
시제차네 삼동 드리차 연주사네 아니 신에 가서 상물로 지 가서야 지 타니를 줘야지 시에마도 지금 아주 다지 조도 망부 시제 지 랑다 현사데 타르무르차 랑다 현사데 아니지 아주 사번는 신지기 다지 타르무지 요마르디네 타르무지 위나르샤 안디체 안디 토리아다 조도 망부 체인주스다네 아니 아주 타르인도린도 하르지
라서 테네 드리바기 콩 차셰 디카레스나 디소소 조디 rangulan discrimination kandes dongen jego di sungsoaine jiwa diginandu yang karioresena mi shanda ke shanda la discrimination zo digi kange mangbos jitso la kange mangbos sogi ore dila kandes pengugi or ngazogi dila kandes pen tagugi ore
so the shize chane 아주 직가로 다와 더줍디 아주 사말로기 셰도 망지 체투나 안 펜도 용 그래서
라서
okay.
The question was, how does one deal with and accept discrimination? So His Holiness said that it's very important to start by acknowledging our basic commonality as human beings and start at the most basic level. This is connected to developing loving kindness and compassion. So when we can look at or toward other sentient beings with loving kindness and compassion and remove all of our labels about others, then we see that we are the same as human beings, and there really aren't any distinctions that separate us at the deepest level. And when we connect to this deepest level, that will increase the respect and the love that we have for others. And it will also help us be closer to one another, help us move into a state of being more closely connected to one another. Conversely, if we simply follow after the labels that we apply, the projections that we apply to others, and think that those labels are real, then that brings us further and further apart. So, in terms of working with discrimination within ourselves, it's very important to connect with this understanding of who we all are basically as human beings, and develop the loving kindness and compassion that is willing to let go of all of the labels that we use. And then in terms of helping to face discrimination in society, then I think that the more we connect with this loving kindness and compassion within ourselves, then the more we'll be able to share that with others, and this will have a beneficial effect.
Okay. Tabazi dini jimita.
That's all?
Anji sani shobe azumotine anji lojon di mache anda dine di jela manjus mare.
Lao. That's all? So I think that's enough for today. We'll conclude at this point, and when we come together again tomorrow morning, we will continue our explanation of the mind training text, and then tomorrow afternoon there will be an empowerment.